Hello and welcome to another episode of Business on the Wire. As we continue to hear details of what the economic stimulus package may look like, several bigger concerns remain, including when industry can actually resume activity fully and what the impact has been on the ground both for workers and for companies. Joining me to talk about that and what the modalities of the financial package so far look like is Naushad Forbes, past president of CII and co-chairman of Forbes Marshall. Thank you very much for joining in with this conversation. I want your early thoughts on what we've seen so far, both from the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, in terms of the details of the financial package.
So, this package has clearly been long awaited. And in fact, we have this well-known saying, too little, too late. I think in this case, it's really been too late is going to be too little. So in that sense, I think we welcome the Prime Minister's speech where he talked about a very large package, a package that amounts to around 10% of GDP. Obviously, as he pointed out, including all the measures taken so far. We saw the first detailing out of some of these measures yesterday from the Finance Minister. And again, very welcome in their targeting of MSMEs and in support for MSMEs. Some good moves in terms of whether you call it reform or not, I don't know, but in terms of changing the definition of MSMEs, we've now increased the limits very substantially, which was a long pending requirement, really. It needs to go still further because I think what we call a medium-sized firm in our country is what any other country would call a small enterprise, and so we need to go further in these limits. And the one thing that I think is still missing in broadly is a wider enterprise support package. There were some measures announced yesterday around Provident Fund contributions and so on, but those are really measures at the margin. They're not going to make the difference. They help, but they're not going to make a difference between a firm that survives and one that doesn't.
That's the thing, Mr. Forbes. I mean, most people believe that at this point, given India's situation, what is of utmost importance is direct cash transfers. Something to the tune of almost 10 lakh crores has to go into the hands of people who deserve it or need it. Ditto for the MSMEs. I mean, we heard almost, I think, about 6 lakh crores in terms of some guarantee or some scheme. But what the MSMEs were asking for was support in terms of salary payout, to help to pay their workers in order to stay employed and then resume business as and when it should. On that, it seems sorely lacking yet.
So, we made three key proposals from CII, from the Confederation of Indian Industry, now over a month ago, in early April, as our recommendations for the economic package. The first was bottom of the pyramid direct income transfers. And we said, look, we need to address that the bulk of employment in our country is informal. It's the informal employment that has been most seriously damaged and hurt. And it shows up, for example, in the migrant labor tragedy that we've seen unfold on our TV screens in this last 6 weeks or so. And it's there where people have been left with nothing. They have no cushion really, and they live day to day, and they've been left with nothing. And we've said that the first thing that we need is a direct benefit transfer to people, probably using Jan Dhan accounts as the most widespread available vehicle for these direct income transfers. And even though the FM's first scheme announced now over 6 weeks ago of the 1.7 lakh crore targeted people at the bottom of the pyramid, there were a whole set of components. I think there were something like 13 separate schemes and little bits going here, there, everywhere. And we were recommending something that was much broader based. We said, look, don't worry, this is not the time to worry about targeting. Don't worry if someone is already covered by a scheme and gets another benefit. At present, the key thing is to try and leave no one out. So who's really vulnerable. And if that means that a few people get a double benefit, let them get the double benefit. We're not talking large amounts. We're talking 3,000 rupees, every 2 weeks, that kind of a transfer. I still think that's the way to go, and I hope we will hear something around that in the days ahead, because I think really providing those direct benefit transfers to people who are most vulnerable, have been hardest hit by the entire lockdown, has to be our first priority. The second big priority was widespread enterprise support, and specifically focused on salaries. And we said, look, don't try to distinguish between enterprises. And this is where I think our main concern would be on the package we heard yesterday. You said, look, provide for 3 months' wages for all enterprises and provide it in the form of loans for using the banking system, exactly as we heard yesterday. Uh, Provided in the form of guarantees that the government would give the RBI, and the RBI would pass on to the banks. And this then enables all enterprises to support employment. And we said, don't distinguish between enterprises. Do this for a small shop, do this for an MSME, do this for a large construction company, do this for a hospital, do this for a large manufacturing company. Do it across the enterprise sector, and do it not at a subsidized interest rate. Say we said, look, do it at an interest rate of 4 to 5%. Banks have deposited huge amounts. I think 8.5 trillion rupees, 8.5 lakh crore as of now, with the RBI, and they've, and they've deposited. They've done that at an interest rate of just over 3%. Let them lend it out at 4 to 5%. The reason they're not lending today is because of risk aversion, because they're concerned about getting the money back. So provide it in the form of a government guarantee. So I think some parts of that have been picked up and incorporated in what we heard yesterday. The loan guarantee way of going about MSME support is directly, I think, on the right track. I would like to see this being much more widely applicable to the enterprise sector in general, because I think that's what's necessary. And we said, do it for 3 months, 3 months' wages, do it across the enterprise sector. If you do that and you provide the direct benefit transfers, you're also setting the foundation for a much quicker and I think much more robust recovery.
This is the problem, though, with much of the government's communique so far, though, Mr. Forbes. I mean, there is that 10% of GDP figure. It is odd form to bung in the RBI's liquidity efforts into that figure, but that has been done. And one gets the feeling that perhaps the bulk of this effort is going to be a crisscross of guarantees, loan guarantees and other support, but very little actual fiscal spend going into the system, which we all know is crucial to get the economy back again. Is that your sense, that it's largely going to be the government sort of creating a safety net of guarantees and schemes, but not really putting its hand in by way of spending?
So actually, I think actually creating a set of guarantees, loan guarantees, is a very, very efficient and effective way of supporting the economy, because it goes very far. A limited amount of expenditure by the state ends up having a huge impact. Because so, for example, and I think I mean, I don't care whether we count, to me, the 20 lakh crore number, 20 lakh thousand crore number is not the big thing that we need. What we need more than anything else is the end objective. If we get banks to lend to enterprises, and enterprises are supported, and because of the support they sustain employment, people are secure in their employment, they know they will stay employed, they know they will keep getting their salaries. I mean, then we're really setting the foundation for a good recovery and good support for the economy. So now Will it cost the total amount of the loan guarantees? Of course not. One hopes not. Simply as a result of this scheme, one would hope for a much more robust recovery. If we have a more robust recovery, fewer guarantees will actually get called on, and the cost to the government will be much less. I think that's a good thing. So I don't care so much about the actual amount. I care much more about the end delivery of the objective. That how do we sustain enterprise employment across all sectors, across all sizes of enterprises? Because if we can sustain employment, we're doing the key thing that will both support people and provide a foundation for a quick recovery. So that's what I would say. And I'm not so bothered about the, that does this actually add up to 20 lakh crore and on, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not so bothered about that. I'm much more concerned about the end delivery of the objective.
Sure. I was speaking to the former economic affairs secretary earlier, who made the point that a good sign of whether or not the economy is coming out of its logjam is what's happening with the liquidity levels for banks. And at this point, they're actually flush with liquidity,
Yes.
but neither do they want to lend, nor
Yes.
do parties on the other side want to borrow, whether it's individuals or corporates. I mean, you have a much better sense of what's happening at the ground level with some of these industries. Are they in the mood to step out and take more lines of credit given the situation at this point?
So if the lending was provided, and that I think is a very good move. It said with no additional collateral was now how the government is going to assure that, that there will be no additional collateral called for, no personal guarantees asked for, etc. Uh, that's very important. If the government can ensure that, I think it will have a very useful effect. Um, Now, the important thing will be how does the banks get that security? And if they have that security because of this government guarantee, and they're told, look, we're guaranteeing this, but having guaranteed it, we expect you to lend. Having guaranteed it, we expect you to lend at this rate that is more than what you're earning with your deposits with the RBI. Um, but we expect you to lend also because it's guaranteed. You should not be charging a risk premium, so you should be able to lend out at 4 to 5%.
Hmm. Let me move to the ultimate aim, as you said, which is to restart the economy.
Yeah.
On that, there seems to be still not enough clarity, either in terms of how it's going to be done, what the plan is for the 17th or for the 31st of May, for that
Yes.
matter. Would you expect to hear more?
Yeah, I definitely both expect to and need to hear more. I think we all do. Uh, the One of the things that I mean, first, I'll make two comments. Um, First, we should recognize that the impact on the economy has been really dramatic. My back of the envelope calculation says that in April we saw a fall of 40%, so 40% in total GDP output. That essentially only three sectors were unaffected. Agriculture broadly, because people still eat and produce food. Second, government services, because government spending and government continued, and we estimate government output on the basis of how much is spent on it. And third, communications, because we're all doing things like this on using various telecom services. So those three sectors were unaffected in April. Every other sector was really badly hit. Starting with manufacturing, which I think probably saw a fall of two-thirds of total output. Um, you take electricity, over a third, a fall of over a third in output. Um, if you take GST collections from the government, the indications are that GST collections came in at under a third of a normal month. I mean, a dramatic fall in actual collections, which indicated a huge fall in output. So I think every indication was that the economy was really, really seriously damaged from the lockdowns in the month of April. So we need to keep that in mind when we talk of recovery. We're not talking about, growing 3, 4, 5%. We're talking if to go from 60% back to 100%, we have to we have to see a bounce back. Essentially, we have to see a doubling of output for most sectors, and from where we were in April, and that's no easy ask. So that's the first comment that I make. The second comment that I make is, just coming directly to your question about, would I like to hear more about what's going to happen? How will the reopening happen? And I would love to hear, I would love to see not only how the reopening is going to happen in the short run, but I'd like to see a transparent dashboard provided of how we're going to handle lockdowns, restart, restricted start, restrictions on economic activity going forward, and how that will be connected with the unfolding health crisis. Many countries have laid things out very transparently. Uh, in Germany, for example, they have a norm that if there are more than a certain number of cases per 100,000 population in a particular city, uh, then there are increasing restrictions that come into play. If they're below that level, then they keep going ahead with the opening up. And that gives everyone a transparent dashboard that they can work to. They know that if the infection load increases beyond a certain point, it will lead to restrictions on activity. People can plan accordingly. And I think we need the same kind of thing. I do not understand why we try to play it so close to the chest. Why, why should any of these things come as surprises? Why should we be, hanging around waiting for some big speech and address to the nation, in the anticipation of a big announcement? I think there's so much uncertainty that the health crisis provides. We don't need to add to it.
It's also a question mark how much manufacturing activity can actually, or economic activity can actually begin again in this phased manner. For example, Mumbai contributes between 15 to 20% to central revenues. I mean, to keep this entire area shut down and then to expect a manufacturing hub to navigate between red and green and, green zones, it simply seems like a logistical mess.
Absolutely. You have to, I think we did, let's, I wouldn't talk about the past. Let me just say that manufacturing needs to be restarted across the board. If you try, and it needs to be restarted with safe working protocols, which all companies are putting in place, which in CI we've worked on and recommended. And we've recommended protocols that are pretty rigorous. And the idea is not to comply with some government directive. The idea is to, how do you keep your own people safe? How do you ensure that infection is prevented from spreading at the workplace? Manufacturing companies day to day and for decades operate with clear processes in place. These are the systems you follow. These are the quality systems. These are the output systems, etc. We know how to follow systems in manufacturing, and I think following those processes in manufacturing, adding on a layer of safe working practices, is actually easy in manufacturing. It's something that it's much easier than shopping practices, for example, where we have to learn whole new approaches. I mean, we're used to just walking into a shop. We're not used to, queuing and safe distancing and limited numbers of people and so on. And it's so I think actually having all manufacturing restart is very important. And we've been quite unique as a country in stopping manufacturing. Many there's a German multinational that has 1,500 plants worldwide. And in April, only 22 of their plants worldwide were closed, and they were all in India. So it's, they have plants in pretty well every major economy, and they were all operating. So I think we can keep our manufacturing, and we need to get manufacturing going across the board without any distinction in terms of where the plants are. Yes, you may have more strict protocols in place if the plant happens to be in a containment zone. You may have additional safe working protocols. You may have requirements to disinfect vehicles coming in. You may have requirements of how people can come in, where they need to be housed. You can have a whole list of safe working protocols that are more and more stringent depending on the area and the containment requirements. But the plant should operate. Because if it doesn't operate, then exactly as you say, you have cascading effects. There's no sense in having an end auto company starting up if its component manufacturers cannot supply it with components. And there's no sense in having the end auto company start up if it doesn't have its own outlets available to sell the vehicles once they come out. So you need the full chain operating and in place with all the safe working protocols.
Yeah. There's two other issues I wanted to touch upon, Naushad. One is this talk of reforms, whether it is for labor or land, and the other is the vocal for local, as was voiced by the Prime Minister. In a very strange move, Uttar Pradesh decided to issue an ordinance saying that for the next 3 years, industry was exempt from following any labor laws save for four. Madhya Pradesh has done it in a different form, so has Gujarat. Is this what the industry really wanted? This kind of one-sided setup where you are pretty much doing away with sanitation, industrial dispute resolution, and a number of other core parameters for labor.
So I would say it's welcome in one respect and concerning in another respect. It's welcome in that you actually have now this has brought labor reform back to the forefront of a reform agenda. That's a good thing. So I think that's welcome. Um, the way in which it's been done with these sort of sudden announcements from both UP and MP of simply saying these laws will not apply, I have more concern about. Um, I think we need to address a much more fundamental reform requirement of our current labor contracts. Uh, Over 80% of all labor in the country is informally employed. Uh, they have There you have complete flexibility and almost no protection. They just don't come under all the labor laws, and we have really restrictive labor laws in the country. The restrictive labor laws, which are really restrictive, apply to the formal sector and largely even more to the manufacturing and very organized service sectors. And it's under 20% of total employment that comes under our current labor laws, where you have almost no flexibility and complete protection. So, we need to bring about a reset and a merging of these two. We need less protection and more flexibility for formal labor, and we need a minimum of protection and maybe less flexibility for the informal sector. So we need to see these two groups and the labor laws merge over time such that it covers there is minimum protection that anyone employed in the country can obtain. This is not going to be a small task. This is a huge task, and it won't happen overnight. So I can see the eagerness of some states to say, let's make a start here. Okay, having started, now let's start having a good, deep conversation about how we should reform our labor regulations across the board so we provide a minimum of protection for people who are informally employed, and maybe with some health insurance requirements, with some surcharges that apply on the wages that are provided in those sectors, that address the needs of self-employed people to also invest in and have some minimum health insurance, unemployment insurance, etc., so that we can avoid future migrant tragedies of the kind that we've seen in these last 6 weeks. So I hope in the medium run we'll start having these conversations and start engaging with what that right new labor contract is that should apply across all sectors, where we balance flexibility and protection and don't have this completely bipolar, no protection, complete flexibility on the one side, and complete protection and no flexibility on the other. And we end up the right position is obviously somewhere in between, and both sides will need to move to the center.
One of the underlying premises of those labor law changes, though, Naushad, seemed to be that this would increase or encourage foreign investment. You know,
It
generally,
will.
but generally, these companies have extremely high hygiene standards when it comes to labor. Would you say, given the current set of changes that are in existence for labor laws, would it be a deterrent or encouragement for someone who's looking to come and invest in India, given the very, very fluid state that they've now been left in?
In itself, I don't know what it will actually contribute, but combined with other moves, it could be an attraction. I mean, take why is it that Bangladesh is such an attractive destination for labor intensive industry like garments, or for that matter, a Vietnam or an Ethiopia. Um, they're attractive destinations for two reasons. One is that labor costs are low, and second, those markets have access to foreign markets at with zero duty. So, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Ethiopia have access to the European markets with 0% duty on garments. Same garments from India carry a 10% duty. So we need to combine what's being done on the labor side with negotiations for an India EU FTA, which will actually then enable duty free access. Um, we need to also, I think, address safe working conditions. And if we've said Industrial Disputes Act won't apply, as we've said in Uttar Pradesh, um, what will? What are those minimum safety standards, hygiene standards that will apply? And I think if we start applying our mind to those kinds of requirements and say, here's how we can ensure, yes, you'll have a very flexible employment system that's available in the state. And it's very good to do it at the state level because through competitive federalism, we can push reforms further. It's this is how we can have a flexible labor system, but a flexible labor system where labor and its interests are also protected, which provides for long-term stability of policy then.
Mhm. The other comment that the Prime Minister made was going vocal for local, which the Finance Minister extended in her press conference and said global tenders to be disallowed up to 200 crores. What do you think might be the intent of doing this? And is this the best way to go about encouraging either economy or local enterprise?
Well, I have a very strong bias against protection. Um, and you know, I thought the Prime Minister's two examples of PPEs and masks, N95 masks, were were exactly right. I think it was a very good move to set in place local supply chains for these two emergency items. It ensures much greater security for us, and it ensures that we can meet the demands of our own healthcare system. So I think those two examples were very well placed examples. But from there, if we move to a much more general self-reliance is good idea, I worry. Because I think back to the 70s, when self-reliance was very much part of the economic policy mantra, and it was a terrible time for India. It was a time when we condemned ourselves as a society to having to buy more expensive goods that were poorer quality than what was available worldwide. And I think self reliance tends to get combined with protection. And when it's combined with protection, that combination is very damaging. It's very damaging in the short run to consumer buying, and it's really damaging in the long run to our long term economic prospects. If you look at what's happened since 1991 as we've opened up, uh, our growth in trade has been huge. We've gone from being an economy where less than 10% of GDP came from exports plus imports in 1991 to a situation today where we're one of the larger trading nations around. And we're not only one of the larger trading nations around, where over 50% of our GDP comes today from imports plus exports, uh, but we're in a position to actually see that contributing to growth very significantly in this last 29, 30 years. So I think we have to see our future lying in an open India, an India where firms from India are encouraged to operate and export around the world. And if firms from India are going to operate and export all around the world, then firms from the world have to be free to operate and sell in India. Both those are two sides of the same coin. You can't have a vibrant, there's no country in the world that has a vibrant export sector that doesn't have a vibrant import sector too.
One also wonders which reliance it is that is being alluded to, Naushad. I mean, for example, what are our big pockets of reliance? Oil, for which we look to the oil exporting
Yeah.
countries, defense, which we certainly cannot, turn around for ourselves. And again, even for China, it's mostly technology and perhaps the back end for pharma. So what is it? Which nation is it that we want to pull away from? Investment, of course, from the US, which is a major source. Where is it that we want to pull away from?
What we should be, it's understandable, uh, given the health crisis, becoming much more insular is understandable. We first of all, this disease came from outside of the country, so you close off borders, you prevent people from coming in, etc. Then you say we want to prevent the spread within the country, so you close off state borders. Then you close off city borders, as we are seeing. Then micro containment borders, and then finally, in our own homes, we're not letting visitors in, even if they're allowed, etc. Right? So it's understandable that that's how we're first protecting ourselves. Having achieved those immediate health protective concerns, the trend needs to now turn and move in the reverse direction again. And we need to open up to the rest of the city. We need to have our cities open up to the rest of the state. We need to have our states open up to the rest of the country. And as a country, we need to start opening up internationally. That reverse direction will take some months, unfortunately, for it to unfold. There's an absence of good political leadership worldwide. We do not have an Obama in the White House. We have who we have. And in the absence of effective political leadership worldwide, I think we'll struggle to see better global cooperation to restore more international interaction. But we'll get there eventually. And when we get there, we as a country should be a leading part of that whole push to a more uh, globalized world. The globalization as a word has become almost a bad word in some circles, and we shouldn't underestimate the benefits that we as an economy have gained from integrating much more with the world. Uh, the right pattern going forward is indeed a more interdependent world. Yes, an interdependent world is vulnerable to these kinds of shocks, but then we should work to see how we build in some resilience in spite of that interdependence. But we don't need to move away from interdependence. We should build in, second sourcing, third sourcing. India should be a beneficiary of companies looking to source from India in addition to sourcing from China. But all of those are a part of a more global world, a more interdependent world, and not part of a self-reliant, let's only worry about what's happening within our borders world.
My final question to you, Naushad, which is a problem not from COVID, but for the last 7 quarters now, which is unemployment. The recent CMI figures point not just to an incredibly high unemployment figure, but the fact that it's the age group 20 to 24 and then 25 to 29 that has faced the largest sort of brunt of losing their jobs. Are you worried about this almost exploding unemployment situation we've got going in our country?
So there's a short-term problem and there's a longer-term problem, and we have to address both. The short-term problem is the actual unemployment created by the lockdowns. And CMI data that you referred to, I think it shows, Mahesh Vyas's estimate at CMI was that 120 million people lost their jobs in the 1 month between early March and early April. That's a massive number. And that 120 million was both in urban rural areas. Since the first week of April, now coming into May, some of the rural job losses in informal labor have come back. So there's been a recovery in employment for informal employment in rural sectors, but very little so far in urban sectors. And I think the latest estimate says that something like about 60 million of the jobs still remain lost in urban sectors in informal employment. So that's our immediate problem, and that's what we need to fix. And the only way of fixing it is by restoring economic activity in our cities, because that's where the jobs, the existing jobs, actually are. Is there potential in creating more employment in the states that have been the source of migrant labor? Yes, I'm sure there is, but that's going to take a while to get in place. In the short run, the best way of ensuring that people come back is to ensure that they're free to leave. You can't say migrant labor is welcome to come here, but when they want to go back home, they're not allowed to. That's simply, I mean, I think that's inhuman. That's wrong. I mean, there is no justification for it on any grounds. And it's a violation of, I think, human rights. It's a violation of national rights. It's a violation of citizenship rights as an Indian citizen. So I think if a person wishes to leave and go back to the state that they come from, they have to have that freedom and they have to have the ability of doing so. So that's one piece that we have to worry about in the short run. And I think the best way of ensuring that people will want to come back and take the jobs that will get created again as the economy restarts is by ensuring that they have safe working conditions to come back to, and to ensure also that they always have that understanding that if they wish to at any point in time, they can leave and go home. That's the short run issue. But we have a longer term issue to fix, particularly for the age group that you mentioned and for more educated people in that age group. Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo have a very nice new book out that was brilliantly timed with their Nobel Prize called Good Economics for Hard Times. And they talk about the employment challenges in the country, particularly in this age group for people who are more educated. And they show that people who are less educated, who are between 20 and 30, are actually largely employed. People who are more educated, between the ages of 20 and 30, do not take jobs. But come their 30th birthday, they're employed. Why is it? Because they are all hanging around by the million in the hope of a better job. What is that better job? That better job is a formal sector job, a job in government, a job with a large enterprise, something that carries with it those employment benefits, that protection that gives them security in the long run. So I think if we address those fundamental employment contract issues, we can address this complete what Abhijit and Esther say is what call waste. We can address this huge waste that takes place of millions of our youngest, most capable, best educated people hanging around for year and after year after year in the hope of that better job that doesn't come until they finally give up when they get old, and when they get so old that they can't live with their parents and live off their parents, and they have to then get employed. So they take whatever is available. I think we need to address that medium term or long term issue as well, apart from the short run crisis that has been created by the coronavirus and lockdowns.
Multiple challenges ahead. I don't envy any entrepreneur at this point. Thank you very much for speaking so honestly about all these issues. Thank you, Naushad.